Have you ever wondered how you should invest differently for the various stages of life? Well, stay tuned to this week's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton, here with my good friend and co-host, Sarah Samuels. And today, we're talking about the 4 different life stages when it comes to investing your money, what you need to know about each one, and frankly, to know how and when to make adjustments from one to the next.
Dave, it's great to be here with you, of course, and with all of our listeners. And, it's been a little while since I've seen you. I actually saw some pictures on social media where you were helping out at our company volunteer, some kind of charity event that we were doing.
It's pretty cool, actually. It was something that, gosh, if I ever retire, I'd probably do a lot more of, which is a big if for me, the retirement part. But it was really nice. It was basically feeding the poor, and it's a company that basically, warehouses all these products, and it was good. So we had various jobs and stocking shelves and boxing things and unboxing things. It was a good experience.
Yeah, well, it looked like you guys had a great time.
And why weren't you there, young lady?
Oh, unfortunately, I wasn't able to. I had a prior commitment. But next time we do one of those events, I think it would be great because, giving back to the community is so important. And I think that it's one of those things that our listeners that are in retirement, that are nearing retirement, can really consider because it gives you a lot of fulfillment. Like you said, Dave, you want to do it again.
That's right. And you have to, we had a show recently talking about successful retirement, and the reality is people who retire because they're moving towards something and they live a much more fulfilled retirement. But today, we're kind of taking a step backward because we're not just talking about that particular phase. We're talking about all 4 stages, really components of your life cycle, if you will, from an investment standpoint.
Yep. And that's one of the big things that we talk about every single week is making that transition, of course, the transition to that income first approach. But like you said, Dave, there's really 4 main stages when it comes to investing. We focus on transition, which is really the second stage. So let's talk about the first stage, which is accumulation.
So the first stage is accumulation, and that's really up until 10 or 15 years outside of retirement. That's where you're just saving money, you're trying to get total return. You don't really care if that total return comes from income or growth from the I or the G. You just want your money to grow, and you might have various needs along the way. The transition year starts 10 or 15 years before retirement, certainly, hopefully more than 5, but preferably 10 or 15, where now you start to pay attention to how much comes from the I versus the G, the income from the growth. You're still trying to grow your money, but you're starting to make that transition into income. The third stage, Sarah, is we call the go-go years, the early retirement years. And that's maybe the first 15 years or so where you're out, you're traveling, you're doing lots of things, you're spending a lot of money. And those are the beginning of the income years. But the income years go into 2 stages. That first half, which is the third stage, and the second half, which is the fourth stage. And that's where you might not think you need as much income because you're not doing as many things. Right. Maybe you're in your slow-go years where, you just don't want to do as much. But some of those expenses for traveling go away, but they get replaced with medical expenses and other costs. So you still need income in those later years.
Yep, and that's why we're spending today's show talking about those 4 unique investment stages of life. And we, like I said, Dave, we typically talk about the transition phase, but our next Ask Dave question looks like it comes from Carly in New York, who I believe is in her accumulation stage, because she says, I want to retire eventually, but I'm trying to balance that along with sending my kids to college eventually. My husband would also like to purchase a second home, a vacation home. So how do I balance all of this?
All right, Carly, great question. And, that's what's unique about the accumulation years is that you're trying to grow your assets. You don't need income for a while. College, I would say, is a lump sum goal because even though it's over 4 years, you're taking out 4 lump sums and paying for college. Vacation home is more of a lump sum goal. And then retirement's an income goal, but you're not quite at that transition stage yet. But the question is, what types of accounts, Carly, do you put that money in? So obviously you want to get a good start on retirement. You want to put a good amount of money away because time value of money with all that tax deferral says money saved in your earliest years are going to have the biggest effect on your ability to grow it long term toward retirement. But you can also overfund that plan. For example, if you put all of your savings into 401ks, then guess what? You're not going to have money to buy a second home. It's going to be trapped in that 401k. You're not really going to be able to use that for college, so you're going to be stuck. So there has to be a balance. And the first thing I would say is you should be doing your 401k up to the matching amount. So if they're matching 50 cents on a dollar or dollar for dollar up to a certain level, at least do that much. Then if you're convinced, let's say you have a few children and you're convinced that at least one or two of them will go to school, well, then you want to put some money in a 529 plan. Because 529 plans can be switched from one child to another, and that money comes tax-free if it's used for college. Now, if you have one child and you're not sure if that person is going to go to college, then a 529 plan might not be the best. But assuming that it is, now you've got some money going to retirement, some money going to 529, but then you want to have a little bit of money just being saved that's not committed toward any what I call use-specific plan. Use-specific plans are plans like 401ks dedicated toward retirement, where if you use them for any other purpose, they don't work so well. 529 plans dedicated toward college. If you use them for any other purpose, they don't work so well. And that third bucket's that flexible bucket. So that it could go for the second home, but if you need it for college for your kids, you can use it. If you need to supplement your retirement, you can use it. So my best advice would be to diversify, not just from a stock and bond standpoint, but also from a standpoint of the different buckets of money and their nature of how much they're use specific versus more flexible.
All right. Well, Carly, I hope that answers your question. And thank you so much for sending in your question and for listening to the show. If any of our listeners out there have a retirement question that you would like to ask Dave, all you need to do is send us an email to askdave@retirementincomesource.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we are talking about the 4 distinct, unique phases of investments when it comes to your life. So we've talked about accumulation. The second stage is the transition stage, which we talk a lot about on the show. The third stage, we call that the go-go years. That's when you're going to be spending a lot of income. You're going to be traveling, doing all those fun things in retirement you always dreamed about. And of course, the fourth stage, which is the later retirement years. You might be slowing down, but again, you're going to need that money for healthcare expenses potentially. So Dave, you mentioned that the best way for someone in their accumulation phase, you mentioned a few things, right? Like maxing out the 401k, that makes sense. Making sure that you're putting money away in a 529 plan for college if you're trying to save for that.
If you feel confident that at least one child will have some higher level education, yes.
Yep. And you also mentioned having some money in non-use specific accounts, money that's not locked away in a 401k or the 529 plan and can only be used for that purpose without a penalty. And that's really, it all comes down to figuring out your goals, right? You kind of went through all of Carly's ideas or her goals, things she wants to do, and said, hey, this is a lump sum or this is an income goal. And it seems like that's how to start it off.
That's right. And again, it's being, really purpose versus performance driven. It's all about investing for your purpose, but you don't know exactly how much you need for retirement when you're young. You don't know exactly how much you need for college or exactly how much that second home is going to be, so you have to take a guess. And people understand the power of tax deferral. We had a whole show maybe 5-6 episodes ago about tax deferral. And the problem is most tax deferred plans are use specific, right? 401ks, retirement, IRAs, retirement, Roth IRAs, retirement, annuities, retirement. 529 plans are tax deferred, but they're the college.
Right.
So you need some general money, and really the only two ways to, one way to do it is just a regular taxable account. Another way to do it, which we may or may not have time to talk about more, is overfunded life insurance. Some people take a cash value life insurance policy, dump a bunch of extra money in to make an investment, and then you get tax deferral without those age or use restrictions.
All right. Well, overfunded life insurance, that sounds like one potential way that you could help alleviate this problem.
That's right, Sarah. We'll be able to talk about that coming up in just a moment. But also, how about the other 3 stages of retirement? Well, stay tuned. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we are talking about the 4 different stages of life when it comes to investing. So we've talked a little bit about the first stage, which is the accumulation stage, and this is when you're trying to save up as much money as possible. Dave answered a question from Carly in New York, who was wondering how can she balance all of these things, including saving for retirement, funding her kids' college, and even buying that second vacation home. But Dave, you mentioned too that there's you can do something called you can overfund your life insurance, and that's one way to help generate income. Can you explain a little bit more?
That may sound counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it's a strategy. There was an article, I think it was in Forbes magazine, or maybe it's the Wall Street Journal, probably 30 years ago. Not quite 30 years ago, because Roth IRAs didn't exist, but maybe 25. They called it the rich man's Roth. And the idea was you get above a certain income level, you can't make a Roth IRA contribution. But overfunded life insurance from a tax perspective can work like a Roth IRA, where you put after-tax money in, it grows tax deferred, and you can access that money tax-free. Now, it's a little harder to access, probably beyond our conversation today, but it can act a lot like a Roth IRA. And the reason this can work for younger folks to some degree is because if you're younger, you have a family like Carly, well, you need life insurance, right? And you could buy term, and depending upon your financial situation, term could be better. But if not, you can buy a cash value life insurance. You can throw more money in it over and above the premium, up to certain limits, and that extra money goes right into the cash value. And it grows tax deferred, just like a Roth IRA or a 529 plan, and can be accessed tax-free down the road. But see, the benefit of it, Sarah, is once again, 529 plans are great if you use the money for college, but if you use it for anything else, there's potential penalties.
Yeah.
That's right. If you have a Roth IRA, it's great for retirement. Use it for something else, there's potential penalties. Now, life insurance can be used for multiple purposes. So, for example, it's something that I did for myself, even, and a lot of my clients, but for myself early on in my career, because I wasn't really sure. In this business, you can work forever if you love what you do, like I do. So, am I really going to want retirement? Am I going to have kids? I don't know. Maybe not. I was undecided. So I put a good chunk in this middle bucket, and what it does, Dave did was give me a lot of flexibility, where I've been able to use that account over the course of the years for lots of different purchases, for houses, for boats, for airplanes, for things, whatever I want to use. But it's still going to be there for retirement. So again, not to build your whole plan around, but if somebody has enough cash flow, it can give you that tax deferral and that flexible bucket, especially if you're not sure how much money you need for retirement, how much money you need for college, and et cetera.
Yep. Well, a lot of people, they're not even sure exactly when they might want to retire, like our next Ask Dave question. This comes from Ed in Minnesota. He says, I'm in my early 50s and I don't know yet when I want to retire. So how can I figure out when I need to make this transition to income?
Well, Ed, it's interesting. You've got to try to narrow it down. And you might narrow it down, between 60 and 70, 65 and 75. And that gives you a range. And if the earlier year starts to get within 15 years of now, or definitely within 10 years of now, then you at least have to consider it. But I would consider making another calculation to say, okay, how close I am to the retirement that I want. And if you don't know really what you want in retirement, because you don't even know when you're going to retire, take your current income and say, okay, if I subtract Social Security, I subtract rental income, I subtract my pension from my current income, I get down to how much money I would need to replace from investments if I want to live on my current income, just to use that number. And then take a look at how much you've saved so far and say, okay, if I could get 5% on that, how close am I? How much income can that generate? And frankly, if you do some calculations and you say, okay, between that income and if I reinvest that income for the next 10 or 15 years, it'll grow, right? So for example, if you have 15 years to go and you reinvest 5% income, that means 15 years later, that income will be double. If you don't save another dime, whatever income you get from investments today will be double in 15 years. So then you have to add to that what you're saving today. And if you're getting enough where you can afford to retire on the earlier end of your goal and you're within 15 years, then I would say start making that transition from being total return focused, irrespective of whether it comes from the growth or the income, to having an income first, growth second goal. However, if you fall substantially short, then you might just have to get your face fixed around, hey, maybe I do need to extend it toward the later dates of my range. and stay total return focused for a bit longer. In that case, maybe you don't go in the transition stage yet. But again, if you're pro rata for being able to hit your goals at the earlier range, then always transitioning into that transition phase earlier is a safer, more conservative approach.
Yep. And I hope that helps answer your question. And thank you so much for sending in your email to us. If anyone out there would like to send us an Ask Dave question, a retirement question, we might answer it on a future show. All you have to do is email us at askdave@Retirement Income Source. That's SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we're covering the 4 distinct stages of investing. We've talked about the accumulation years. When you're younger, this is when you're trying to save money. You're trying to max out your 401k, put money away for your kids' college if you're sure that at least one child is going to be pursuing college. But you're trying to figure out ways you can balance it all. We've also talked a lot about the transition phase and when you can figure out when it's time to make this transition. But Dave, how can our listeners really start doing this transition? What are the action steps that they can take to make this happen if they're in the transition stage of life?
It's interesting. It's the most complicated stage in some ways because accumulation, you're focusing on total return within your risk tolerance. How it divides between income and growth doesn't matter. In the early retirement stages with income, well, it's all about income, right? So that's easy. It's an income first, growth second approach. In the 4th stage, you might kick down on the income just a little bit if you're more legacy motivated, but chances are, like we said, you need the income to now not for all the due goals and the travel and all, but you need income for healthcare costs. But this transition stage is that squishy period where you're making a gradual transition. It's not a switch, it's more like a rheostat. So in terms of action steps, first thing is you want to make sure this calculation, like I just shared for, I think it was Ed, was that correct?
Yes, Ed from Minnesota.
We shared with Ed, hey, this action step is to say, okay, am I okay if I keep saving what I'm saving and I go to income now, and let's say if I have $1 million, use a round number, and I'm getting 5% income, that's $50,000. And if I reinvest that $50,000 of income should grow at 5% a year between now and retirement.
Right.
So I can figure out if between that and what I'm saving, if I'm going to be okay. If you're okay, the transition years should be accelerated. You should more quickly go to an income first, growth second approach. It's the conservative thing to do. If you roll the dice for too long with a primary growth approach and the markets work against you, you might be stuck working longer. Well, what if you're not quite there? If you're far away, like I said, you might have to stay in your accumulation years longer. But what if you're close but not quite there? Well, then you want to start gradually transitioning from growth to income to more of an income first approach. And it could be in 20% increments every couple years, or maybe you use more high dividend stocks as opposed to bonds and bond-like instruments. So you're getting a little less income, more than you were in your accumulation years, but you're still getting some upside potential. So those transition years are really an art form. And Sarah, that's where, frankly, sometimes people start to outgrow retirement planners in favor of a true income specialist because it is an art.
Yeah, that's why we call it the transition phase. It's a mindset transition. It's a transition of your investments. It's a transition oftentimes to a financial advisor who specializes in income as opposed to the financial advisor you've been with throughout that accumulation stage.
Yeah, and again, it's an art form. Now, some people are blessed because they do the math I gave them and they say, wow, I have more than enough to retire. I've done a good job. I'm great. And even though they might be 10 or 15 years out, they can make up almost an immediate transition to an income first, growth second approach. Others are really unfortunate. They're on the other end of the bookends where they just haven't saved enough and they've got to stay in total return mode and roll the dice and hope for the best. The majority of the group, majority of the bell curve, 70, 80% of the population are the ones in the middle where it's like, well, I'm kind of close. I'm not quite comfortable enough to say I'm there. How do I transition? Again, it's done in stages, and that's where the art form truly comes in. And some astute people can do it themselves, but this is where a lot of people say, "Hey, I need the help of somebody because I'm in that I'm in the red zone, and I'm ready. I want to get that football in the end zone, and it's a lot harder. Those last 10 or 20 yards are a lot harder than the first 80 or 90."
Yep. Well, once you're leaving the transition phase and you're entering that third stage of retirement, those go-go years, you're still going to need income. You're still going to need to know the ins and outs of that specific stage of investing. And we're going to discuss those coming up. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton. And if you're wondering about all the different phases of life and the ways that you should be investing for each, well, today is the show for you. So far, we've talked about the first stage, which is the accumulation stage. That's when you're trying to save as much as possible. Make sure that you are increasing your amount. You're looking at total return. We also talked about the transition phase, which is kind of tricky, right? Dave said it was kind of that squishy phase when it's hard to know when is the right time for you. Depending on how much you have saved, what your current situation looks like. Now we're going to talk about that third stage of life. We like to call it the go-go years. You finally transitioned, you're in retirement, and this is hopefully the stage of life when you are enjoying retirement and doing all kinds of things, which might end up being lump sum goals or income goals.
Yeah, it kicks in at different stages, right? I mean, some people think, okay, I snap my fingers and the day I retire, I'm in the income phase. And that may or may not be true. You know, you might have some severance that lasts for a while. You might have, a bunch of vacation time that gets paid out in a lump sum. So there could be a year or 2 years delay with other benefits. Some people have deferred compensation and they live off that for a few years. So the income stage may not kick in the day you retire. The other thing is a lot of people feel as though, oh, I've got to take Social Security when I retire. Well, your Social Security will generally grow at between 6.5% and 8% every year you postpone it, 6.5% in the earlier years, and then 8% per year after age 67. So it behooves you sometimes to wait to get more benefits depending upon your personal situation. So you might say, wow, I have an enormously big need for income for the first few years, and it's going to go down when Social Security kicks in. Yeah. Well, maybe not. Because you may find that hey, if I've got 5 years of Social Security, I need income. But if I take 5 years worth of what that Social Security deficit is out of principal, it's not really the end of the world, right? Yeah. So if I figure at 70 when I'm collecting it, I need to supplement it with 30,000 of income. Well, if you're generating 30,000 of income, that might be okay, and take the rest out of principal because it's only for 5 years. It's till Social Security kicks in, and that may make sense. So in that case, you might be lucky you've saved enough money where you can get all of that from income, from the interest and dividends, even before you take Social Security, or you may have to take a little bit of principal, and that's okay. Just do the math. Does it make more sense to wait to collect Social Security or take it now? Now, others are really fortunate, Sarah. Others have like a huge pension plan, the old-fashioned type pensions that pay you a monthly income. They don't need income from the investments at all. That is until that dreaded age of 70 and a half.
Right, when those required minimum distributions finally kick in and you have to pay the taxes on those
accounts. That's right, because then you have a choice to make. Do you let the government force you to take the RMDs out of principal, or do you invest for income first so you can satisfy those from interest and dividends? So, Sarah, even if you're getting back to transition years, even if you're in that category where you don't need the income till the RMDs, you still want to start transitioning in the mid-60s because RMDs could kick in at the middle of a downturn in the market, and now you're stuck taking principal, and that's not fun.
Yep. Well, let's get into our next Ask Dave question. This question comes from Jake in Kentucky. Jake says, I am getting 5% in CDs and short-term treasuries. I'm not retiring just yet, but overall, I feel pretty good, and I feel like I'm prepared. So what am I missing? Jake is the paranoid type. He says, what am I missing, Dave? I thought I've got it covered, but I'm not sure.
Well, it sounds like Jake is the smart type who's a good planner, who's pretty conservative, because it sounds like he feels like he's accumulated enough money that he could go more defense now. He can work with CDs and treasuries, and that's pretty good. So now work for Jake is really a luxury. He goes to work because he wants to, not because he has to. And Jake, if you're conservative, the CDs and treasuries are good. They fit the mold. I like that. But here's what you're missing. Good question. Great way to ask it. And here's what you're missing is the fact that think back to the last 15 years. For most of those 15 years, interest rates have been a lot lower than they are today, right? So you might look at that 5% now, and I'll use my famous $1 million number because it's a round number. You might say, hey, I'm getting $50,000 a year with virtually no risk. Between that, Social Security and pension, I'm good to go. I can retire tomorrow. Excellent. But there's no guarantee you're going to get that 5% forever. When those CDs come due and roll over, it's going to be at the interest rate at that time. Those short-term treasuries come due and roll over, it's going to be based upon the interest rate at that time. And, if interest rates are the highest they've been in a while, and you've got a Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, the chairman, who's saying, hey, we're going to be lowering interest rates again, you've really got to question, is that 5% sustainable? So what I don't want you to do is have this sense of comfort long-term. You got some good comfort short-term, but long-term things can change. So I think, if anything, Jake, the one thing you might be missing is that if you want to retire in the next 5 or 10 years, then plan to lock in those rates longer term. Don't just lock them in short term. And I know you get higher rates short term than long term, but that's a trap. You might think, well, I'm getting paid more for short term. Why do I want to commit to long term? Well, because the markets are trying to tell you, if you commit to long term, rates are going to go down. But at least you'll lock in maybe a slightly lower rate, but you'll lock it in for a longer period, which I think will give you the real peace of mind you should have in the years, those transition years that you're in right now.
Yeah. And Jake, thank you so much for sending us your retirement question. If anyone has a question that they would like to ask Dave, all you have to do is send us a message, email us at askdave@retirementincomesource. That's SOURCE.com. And thank you for spending some time here with us today on the Retirement Income Source, where it is all about the income. We are covering the 4 main stages of life when it comes to your investments and the way you should be investing. So we've talked about accumulation stage. We've talked about the transition stage, and we've talked a little bit, Dave, about the early years in retirement. You mentioned some times where it might be a good idea to take some principal. And I think you mentioned a great point with Jake, our last Ask Dave question asker, who said, hey, I feel good about retirement, but he's really invested in a lot of short-term things. And you mentioned, hey, now is a great time if you're 5 to 10 years out from retirement to lock in the interest rates. That way you can get more income.
Yeah, lock it in for a longer period, because we always talk about how you have to match the length of your liability with the length of your asset. In fact, that's how we had just a year ago, we had those regional bank failures, because they weren't matching the length of time, the duration, if you will, of their liabilities with the duration of their assets, and they got in trouble. Well, same is true in retirement. Retirement is what? Is it short-term financial liability or long-term financial liability?
Hopefully it's a long-term financial liability, right? 30 years or more, ideally.
God willing, that's right. So that means you have to match it with long-term assets. So if you're matching that long-term liability with a short-term asset, things can go wrong. And if you've really scored enough points, like Jake seems to have, to win the game of life, financially speaking, then why take the chance of unwinning it? There's just no need to do that, because you're already there.
Right. You need to, you talk about, you have to play defense versus playing offense. And Jake is really in the enviable position where he can play defense. He just has to kind of protect what he has, and then maybe lock in those longer term interest rates, and he should be okay.
So he's one of those people in the transition years that I mentioned that probably did the math, realized he had enough. So it wasn't so much of a rheostat in those transition years, more of a boom, snap the finger and make the change. So, it's like, commend Jake. I mean, he did 90% of it right. If there's one thing that he could have done better, in my opinion, it's locking in the rate with more longer-term assets versus short-term assets.
Yeah. What is the one thing you think people might be forgetting when they are in these early years of retirement? They've already transitioned. They're trying to enjoy their retirement. Are there things that they need to look out for?
I think the biggest thing is actively budgeting and seeing what you're spending. The best laid plans can and do fail. And you could create a retirement income goal and say, hey, this is what I think I need to hit all these goals of mine, and you could hit it. But then you get into retirement and you find out you're really spending more. And if you're not paying attention, you can find yourself depleting savings to supplement your income. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you don't have your emergency fund, and then you have a financial emergency. Now you got to take it out of your 401k or your IRA, and it becomes troublesome. So I think you always want to course correct in little bits and pieces. And it's like racing a sailboat. When you're racing a sailboat, the art of it is to make small incremental changes and tweaks to the sails. And then see how that adjusts the direction of the boat and the speed of the boat, and then make another change. Amateurs try to make too many changes too quick, and sometimes they'll slow the boat down, and that's not good. So this is where I think that these folks get a chance at early retirement years to take a chapter out of Dennis Conner's book, right? In terms of how to really get the most boat speed out of that sailboat and monitor it. And you might find you're spending a little bit much. Maybe you have to adjust your investments or adjust your spending. Or some people find they're not spending enough. They could spend more. And that's great. That's a great thing for people to know because now it gives them peace of mind.
Yeah, it gives that permission slip to spend a little bit more. But if you're spending too much in those early years in retirement, it could turn out to be a huge problem later on, especially when it comes to the healthcare costs. So we're going to discuss those coming up in the fourth stage of your investment life when it comes to your retirement. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and today we're talking about the 4 stages of life cycle investing. First, the accumulation years, and the key in those accumulation years is to diversify your money for various goals and make sure you don't overfund retirement or overfund college, and frankly, you have that third account, which is flexible money that can be used for virtually any goal. Then going into those transition years, starting hopefully 10 or 15 years before retirement. And that's where the art form comes in as to how to determine whether you just snap your fingers and go to an income first, growth second approach, or whether you do it gradually in segments. And of course, that all depends upon how close you are on a pro rata basis to hitting your retirement goals. Then we went to the income phase for those go-go years, which we always talk about, Sarah. And that income phase is really can start at different times. It doesn't have to start when you retire, but it usually starts somewhere between retirement and age 73, the age of RMDs.
So, Dave, after the go-go years, we have the fourth stage of investing. And I know we've sometimes refer to them as the slow go or even the no-go years. And this is really the end part of the retirement phase.
Yeah, I guess you can call it stage 4A and 4B, right?
Yeah.
The slow go years are where, okay, you've done it.
Yeah.
The novelty of retirement is worn off after about 10 years. You're spending more time with family. You don't have the energy to travel and do all the crazy stuff anymore, but you're still in pretty good health. That's where cash flow starts to feel better, generally speaking. But what could happen is inflation could put a squeeze on that. So it might just be that it's good that you don't feel like doing all the travel and things, because with expenses going up, it's getting more difficult in the slow go stage to cover those expenses, to cover those costs. Or if not, then it might be a place where if you feel like you've got enough for the next stage, where in case you need home health care or long-term care of some sort, then maybe you can start giving money to children, giving money to church or to various charities, or doing good things, right? If you haven't accumulated enough for those later years, what we call 4B, right, the no-go years, you want to build up a fund for healthcare, well, then maybe you want to reinvest that extra income. Because those no-go years are literally where your health isn't as good. You can't get around as well. And if you're not quite there, Sarah, you're on the brink of, hey, maybe I need to look at a convalescent care home, or maybe a step-down facility where I get some care but can go in the convalescent side if I need to. Or maybe just have enough money to fund home health care insurance, or home health care providers to come in and help me out. So again, the 4A, those slow go years, maybe you have a little more cash flow temporarily, maybe you don't because of inflation. And then 4B, those no-go years where you just simply aren't in the physical condition to travel and you're starting to feel the aging process.
Yep, and reinvesting maybe that extra cash flow you had, that helps provide that healthcare inflation hedge in those later years, if the luck turns out that way, essentially. But there are some other options out there. There's a lot of there's life insurance, there's all kinds of different insurances out there. And our next Ask Dave question actually comes from Stuart in Tennessee. He said, I've looked into long-term care insurance, but I personally think it's way too expensive. What is your opinion on it?
Well, Stuart, you know why long-term care insurance is expensive? Because long-term care is expensive. And statistics show that at least 1 out of 3 people will need some sort of health care benefit in their lives. And the average length of that need is approximately 3 years. So if full-time health care in your state costs, let's say $175,000, 3 years is over $500,000 of costs. So there's at least a 1/3 chance that you're going to incur over $500,000 of costs. And that's why, Stuart, long-term care insurance is so expensive. But there's a big misnomer. A lot of people think, well, I have Medicare. I have Medicare supplements, so this is covered. Well, no. Medicare really only covers the first 100 days. That's it, the first 100 days. And there are even some hoops to jump through along there. for convalescent care or full-time home health care. After that, the bill is yours. So, Stuart, whether or not you should be getting long-term care specifically depends upon a bunch of factors. It depends upon, are you just about barely funded for retirement? Are you overfunded? Are you underfunded? Because here's the thing. If you're underfunded for retirement, you probably can't afford long-term care insurance because it may just take enough money away where you can't retire. If you're adequately funded, you probably want to look at long-term care insurance. If you're overfunded, Stuart, then you might be able to say, hey, I can self-insure. I'm not going to be spending all my income in retirement. I'm going to be reinvesting it. I'm going to be growing it. I'll keep my principal intact into my no-go years so that I can actually pay for those expenses out of pocket. I can self-insure. And that's okay. But Stuart, even some of those folks who are overfunded still have long-term care insurance as an option because they say, gee, this is such a big risk. It's so expensive. It makes sense to push that risk out to an insurance company. So again, Stuart, the real issue depends upon where you are in those three categories. Again, are you really short of the goal? Are you okay with the goal? Or are you significantly over the goal?
Stuart, thank you so much for sending in your retirement question. And if any of our listeners or our YouTube viewers out there have a question that you would like to ask Dave, all you have to do is send us an email to askdave@retirementincomesource.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we have been talking about the 4 different stages when it comes to investing. We've covered the accumulation years. We've covered the transition years. We've also talked about the go-go years, Dave, those early years in retirement when you might be spending more money because you're traveling, you're visiting your family, you're enjoying your retirement.
Those income years.
Those income years, absolutely. And then the later stage in life, the 4th stage, 4A, 4B, or the no-go years, this is the stage in life where you might need to spend some principal when it comes to healthcare expenses because it is extremely expensive. But what else do people need to know about the later years in life?
Well, I forgot to say this when I was talking to Stuart a moment ago, but one of the things is that, obviously, too, if you're making a decision on long-term care insurance, then you need to, first of all, you need to do it early enough because the prices go up if you get it when you're older, and you have to get it when you're in good health. So, I don't know if the health Stuart's in, he may not even be able to get it, but there are some simplified options. There are some lump sum options, lump sum life insurance policies that kind of do triple duty. If you change your mind, you can cash it out and get your money back. If you die, your heirs get your money times a multiple. And if you need it for long-term care benefits, for health care, then again, you get a multiple to use. So there are other things that you can do where maybe the medical underwriting is a little bit easier, or things that you can do where perhaps you don't have to pay this big annual premium out of your income when you're retired.
Yeah. And what else can you do to try to help with the inflation hedge overall, especially in these later years in retirement? What are some things that you can maybe do earlier on?
Well, it's offense and defense. So the first thing is we know medical expenses have an inflation rate that's much higher than everything else, right? So you need to have the best insurance plans in retirement, not just Medicare, not just Medicare Part B, but also look at, hey, what am I getting a Medicare supplement, getting Medicare Advantage, prescription plan? Make sure you have the right benefits so that you're not wasting money if you don't have to. So that's the defense part. The offense part, Sarah, is one of twofold, right? The best way to really engineer inflation hedges in income in retirement is one of twofold. Number one, if you don't need to max out all of your income, you could put a little bit more money in high dividend stock strategies, because over time with healthy companies, those dividends will increase. So that gives you an inflation hedge.
Yep. That's one option right there.
But your income up front is going to be a little lower. So if you need more income, well, then you go into more bonds and bond-like instruments. You get more income. But if you take all that income, you're not going to have an inflation hedge. So really it comes down to living within your means and being able to accept less income in equity strategies, or maybe getting the more conservative things that pay more income but not spending all that income. Actually reinvesting some, trying to reinvest some in those go-go years, or maybe limiting the go-go years, maybe saying, okay, we're going to take 3 to 5 years and travel and do all this, and then we're going to pull back a little bit and start to reinvest it.
Yep. Well, that's the difference, I think, when you invest for income, Dave, is it really gives you all of these different opportunities.
Yeah.
It makes it there. It becomes very, very flexible. You don't have to throw the switch, as you said, and okay, now we're doing income invest. You can slowly make that transition in a way that's comfortable for you, and you're not going to be withdrawing your principal in retirement, which is the most important.
Sarah, that income is a renewable resource, and every year it comes in, and then you just say each year, do I want to spend it this year? Do I want to reinvest it as an inflation hedge? Do I want to give it to charities? Do I want to give it to my grandchildren? What do I want to do? And it's great to be able to be retired and to have that flexibility.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Income means you have opportunities. And thank you so much for watching today's show. If you would like to share this episode with your friends, maybe educate them about the 4 investment stages of life, all you have to do is go to retirementincomesourceradioshow.com, and all of our past episodes are there.
And more importantly, you have to come back to us next week. Same time, same station. I'm David Scranton, here with Sarah Samuels, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.